The unexpected dish. Max strode into the Demora Galactica, a renowned restaurant known for its exotic dishes, located on the bustling Gamma 9 space station. As the doors slid open, a symphony of alien conversations and the aromatic sizzle of unknown spices greeted him. The restaurant was a fusion of styles, a glossy high-tech ceiling interspersed with hanging gardens that draped down like vines from an alien jungle. The host, a lithe figure with shimmering skin, welcomed him. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, under Max Richardson," he replied, adjusting his collar slightly. "Ah, Mr. Richardson. Right this way, please." The host led him to a secluded booth, subtly lit by soft, ambient lights. "Your waiter will be with you shortly." Max scanned the menu, intrigued by the names of dishes from dozens of planets and cultures. Just as he was debating between a Zeltron soup and a rare steak, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "First time at the Demora Galactica?" asked a man in the next booth, an elderly gentleman with a friendly demeanor. "Yes, actually. Any recommendations?" Max asked, turning towards the man. "The rare steak is phenomenal here. It's not what you'd expect, but it's a delicacy. Sounds interesting." "I'll give it a try," Max decided, flagging down a waiter, a tall, blue-skinned creature with eyes like black pearls. "Rare steak, please," Max told the waiter, who nodded and whisked away into the kitchen. While waiting, Max chatted with the neighboring diner, who introduced himself as Tolan, a trader from the outer colonies. They exchanged stories of their travels, the peculiarities of interstellar trade, and the quirks of dealing with different species. As their conversation blossomed, the waiter returned, carrying what was supposed to be Max's order. The dish was covered by an ornate metallic dome, which the waiter lifted with a flourish, revealing not a steak, but a young alien girl curled up on the platter. Her skin was a pale lavender, and she looked up at Max with wide, terrified eyes. Max stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. "What is this? There's been some mistake." Tolan peered over, his expression turning to one of confusion and then anger. "This isn't what you ordered. How dare you serve him this?" The waiter stammered, his voice a mix of confusion and apology. I'm terribly sorry, sir. I'll fix this immediately." "No, wait!" Max exclaimed. He looked at the girl, who seemed just as confused and scared. "She's clearly sentient. Why is she on a plate?" Tolan joined him, standing as well. "This is unacceptable. We need to speak to your manager now." The manager, a harried-looking woman with antennae twitching in distress, rushed over. "I can't apologize enough, gentlemen. This is a grave error." Max focused on the girl, offering her his hand. "It's okay. You're safe now. Can you tell us your name?" The girl hesitated, then took his hand tentatively. I am Ilara," she murmured. "We need to sort this out, but I promise, Ilara, you're not going back on that plate," Max assured her, his voice firm yet gentle. Tolan nodded in agreement. "Absolutely not. We'll take care of this, young lady." The chapter closes as Max, Tolan, and Ilara sit together, forming an unexpected team. They are determined to unravel the mystery of how Ilara ended up as a dish in a restaurant known for its culinary delights, setting the stage for a story of cultural discoveries and newfound alliances. Chapter 2. Misunderstandings and Introductions. Max guided Ilara out of the restaurant's main dining area and into a quiet back corridor. The alien girl clung to his hand, her lavender fingers trembling slightly. She looked around with wide, anxious eyes, her other hand nervously tugging at the simple tunic she wore. "All right, we need to figure this out," Max said, his tone even but determined. He glanced at the restaurant's manager, who had followed close behind. Explain to me exactly how a sentient being ends up on the menu. The manager, a woman with tall, segmented antennae and 4 shimmering eyes, fidgeted nervously. It was a cultural misunderstanding, I assure you. There's a dish in her species' cuisine that is, well, let's just say it translates poorly into common. Someone on my staff must have assumed. That's ridiculous, came a sharp voice from behind. Max turned to see Tolan, the trader he'd met earlier. This isn't just a mistranslation. It's careless. You can't treat someone's life as a misunderstanding. Ilara flinched slightly at Tolan's tone, and Max squeezed her hand gently. Hey, it's okay. We're going to figure this out. He knelt slightly to meet her gaze. Ilara, right? Do you remember how you got here? She hesitated, looking between Max and Tolan. I was traveling with someone from my clan, she said softly. Her voice had a melodic quality, almost musical. But then I was taken. I don't know by who. I woke up here. Tolan grunted. Sounds like you were trafficked. It's more common on these fringe stations than anyone wants to admit. The manager's antennae drooped. We don't condone that here. If someone on our staff is involved in something like that, that's a conversation for later, Max interrupted. Right now, Ilara needs help. She can't stay here. What's the process for contacting her people? Ilara shook her head quickly. No, I don't want to go back. They will see it as shameful. They'll think I've been tainted. She looked away, her cheeks darkening to a dusky purple. I can't face them. Max frowned. All right. Then we'll come up with another plan. First, let's get you somewhere safe. He turned to Tolan. You mentioned you've done trade runs through here. Do you know anyone who could offer temporary housing, someone we can trust? Tolan rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I know a few folks in the Merchant Guild. There's a guy named Harvin who owes me a favor. He's got a spare room above his shop. The manager nodded quickly. If that's suitable, we'll cover the cost. Consider it part of our apology. Max glanced down at Ilara. Does that sound okay to you? A safe place, just until we figure out what's next. Ilara hesitated, then nodded. All right. I don't want to stay here. Good, Max said, offering her a small smile. Tolan, can you reach out to your friend? Already on it, Tolan said, pulling out a small communication device. He stepped a few feet away, speaking in low tones. Max turned his attention back to Ilara. You're going to be okay. We'll sort all this out. Do you remember anything else? Who brought you here? What they looked like? Ilara shook her head. I remember someone in a dark uniform, but I was unconscious for most of the journey. The manager interjected. We'll cooperate fully with the station authorities. I'll have my security team pull any footage from the last few days. We'll get to the bottom of this. Tolan returned, nodding. Harvin's expecting you. I'll take you over there. Max glanced at Ilara again. Let's go. You're safe now. As they left the restaurant, Tolan walked alongside Max, keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. The station's corridors were crowded and chaotic, filled with beings of every shape and size. Ilara stayed close to Max's side, her small hand still clutching his as if it were a lifeline. They arrived at Harvin's shop, a compact, cluttered space filled with various trinkets, tools, and trade goods. The owner, a burly human with a friendly face and a greying beard, greeted them warmly. Tolan told me what happened. Poor girl. Come on in. He led them upstairs to a cozy room with a single bed, a small table, and a view of the bustling station below. Ilara looked around, her expression a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "This will do," Max said. "Thank you, Harvin." Harvin waved a hand. "Anything for Tolan. Besides, no one deserves what she's been through. Let me know if you need anything else." After Harvin left, Max sat on the edge of the bed. Ilara hesitated before sitting beside him, her shoulders tense. Tolan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the pair quietly. "So," Max began, his tone gentle, "you don't have to go back to your people if you don't want to. But we'll need to figure out a way for you to stay here legally. Maybe apply for asylum or—" "Wait," Tolan cut in. "Let's not jump to legalities yet. First, we need more information. If she was trafficked, there might be a bounty or someone looking for her. We have to make sure she's safe before filing any paperwork." Ilara looked between them, her gaze filled with worry. "I don't want to cause trouble." "You're not causing trouble," Max assured her. "You didn't choose this. We're going to make it right." Tolan nodded. "Yeah, kid. You've got people looking out for you now." For the first time since they met her, Ilara's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Chapter 3. Connections. Max leaned against the kitchen counter, frowning at the small translation device in his hand. It emitted a faint hum as it powered on, its surface smooth and reflective. "This should help," he muttered, glancing toward Ilara, who sat at the small table across the room, her lavender hands folded in her lap. She tilted her head, her luminous eyes watching him curiously. "What is it?" "It's a translator," Max explained, placing it on the table between them. "A loaner from the embassy. I thought it'd make it easier for us to communicate." Tolan, who had been sitting nearby scrolling through his comm tablet, set it down and looked up. "That's a pretty basic model. Max don't expect miracles." "It's what they had," Max replied, tapping a few buttons. The device projected a thin beam of light, scanning the air between them. "Ilara, could you say something?" Ilara hesitated, then spoke softly in her native tongue. Her voice flowed like water, the words almost musical. The device paused for a moment before emitting a synthesized voice in common. "I am grateful." "Well, that's a start," Max said, offering her a smile. "It'll take a bit for it to learn your full language, but this should help us get through the basics." Tolan grinned. "Or you could teach her common yourself. Might be more accurate." Max chuckled. "True, but this is faster. And I'm not exactly a linguist." Ilara listened quietly, her gaze flickering between them. When she finally spoke, the translator struggled for a moment, then rendered her words. "You are kind. Both of you." Tolan waved a hand. I'm just here for the ride. Max is the one who's good at the whole saving people thing." "Not really," Max said, a little embarrassed. "I'm just doing what anyone would." "Not everyone would," Ilara said, her voice clear even before the translator echoed her words. "Thank you." Her sincerity made Max pause. He scratched the back of his neck, feeling the weight of her gratitude. "You don't have to thank me. We're just trying to help you find your footing here." Tolan stood up, stretching. "Speaking of footing, how about we get out of here? Sitting around isn't doing anyone any good. Let's show her around the station." Ilara's face brightened slightly. "I would like that." Max glanced at her, then nodded. "All right. But let's stick to the quieter sections. I don't want her overwhelmed." Together, they left Harvin's shop and wandered into the station's bustling corridors. The sheer variety of species and cultures was on full display. Merchants hawked exotic goods, Street performers displayed acrobatics that defied gravity, and the air buzzed with countless conversations in languages from across the galaxy. Ilara stayed close to Max, her eyes wide as she took in the sights. Tolan walked on her other side, pointing out the occasional landmark. "That's the central hub," he said, gesturing toward a towering structure in the distance. "If you need to catch a transport or file official documents, that's where you go." As they passed a row of food stalls, Ilara slowed, drawn by the vibrant displays of fruit and steaming dishes. "What is that?" she asked, pointing to a stand selling brightly colored skewers. "Grilled zerka berries," Tolan said. "They're sweet with a little kick. You should try one." Max reached for his pocket. "I'll get it." Tolan held up a hand. "Nah, I got this." He handed a credit chit to the vendor and passed a skewer to Ilara. "Try it. They're good." Ilara took a tentative bite, her expression shifting from cautious to delighted. "It's very good," she said, a faint smile playing on her lips. Tolan grinned. "See? Told you. Just wait until you try the fried Illyrian pods." Max watched her, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction at seeing her enjoy something so simple. They continued exploring, stopping occasionally so Ilara could examine a peculiar trinket or taste another new dish. At one point, they reached an observation deck overlooking the station's central power core. The massive, glowing structure pulsed with a steady rhythm, casting soft blue light across the room. Ilara stared at it, her expression thoughtful. "Your station is beautiful. So different from my home." Tolan leaned against the railing, looking down at the core. "Yeah, it's got its charm. Never stays quiet, though. You'll get used to it." Max stood beside Ilara. "What was your home like?" he asked gently. Ilara hesitated, her fingers brushing the cool metal of the railing. "Smaller. More open. The air was sweeter, the sky always changing color. We lived close to nature." "That sounds amazing," Max said. "Do you miss it?" She nodded slowly. "I do. But I cannot return now." Tolan cleared his throat. "Well, you've got us. We'll make sure you're okay here." Max smiled at that. "Exactly. You're not alone." For the first time since they'd met her, Ilara's shoulders seemed to relax. She looked at Max, then at Tolan. "I'm glad to have met you both." "Same here," Max said. "Now, let's see if we can find you a translator upgrade. That device back there is barely keeping up." Tolan chuckled. "Typical embassy tech. Always 2 generations behind." As they turned to leave, the translator finally caught up, its synthesized voice repeating Ilara's last words. But by then, they were already walking away, chatting and laughing together. Chapter 4. Unfamiliar Territory. The station's lower marketplace was a maze of narrow corridors, crowded stalls, and merchants hawking wares in countless languages. The air was thick with the smell of fried Illyrian pods, pungent herbal teas, and metallic tangs from half a dozen maintenance shops. Max and Tolan walked shoulder to shoulder, keeping an eye out for any trouble. Behind them, Ilara moved cautiously, her eyes darting to every flicker of movement and flash of color. Max turned his head slightly. "You doing okay back there?" Ilara nodded, her expression tense. "It's a lot. Yeah, I get it. This place can feel overwhelming at first," Max said. "If it's too much, let us know. We can take a break." Tolan snorted. "Or just stick close to us. Nobody's going to mess with a trader and an embassy rep. At least, nobody smart." Max shot Tolan a sideways look. "Let's try not to draw too much attention." They paused in front of a stall displaying an array of glowing crystals and polished gemstones. Ilara reached out, her fingers hovering over a small sphere that seemed to pulse faintly as she neared it. "What's this?" she asked softly. The vendor, a round, beetle-like creature with a glossy black shell, clicked its mandibles together. "That, my dear, is a Uran stone. It resonates with the energy of its holder." Ilara frowned slightly, tilting her head. "Energy?" The vendor nodded. "Your emotions, your thoughts. It picks up on them and responds. Try it." She looked uncertain but picked up the stone. It immediately glowed a soft, warm blue. "Fascinating," Max said. "What does blue mean?" The vendor leaned forward. Calm curiosity. Perhaps a touch of caution. Ilara placed the stone back gently, her lavender skin brushing against the polished surface. "It's strange, but nice." Tolan reached for another stone, this one shifting between green and amber hues. "I'll pass," he said, setting it back down. "I'm not a fan of stuff that reads my emotions." Max chuckled. "You'd rather keep your thoughts a mystery, huh?" "Exactly," Tolan replied, grinning. They moved on, weaving through the market's labyrinth. As they passed a food stall, Ilara hesitated. The vendor was grilling something that smelled both sweet and savory, and her gaze lingered on the skewers turning over the open flame. "Hungry?" Max asked. Ilara nodded, her cheeks darkening slightly. "A little." Max reached into his jacket pocket. "What looks good to you?" Before Ilara could answer, Tolan stepped forward. "You know what? Let's just get a mix. You'll probably like some of it." The vendor, a lanky humanoid with scales running down his arms, handed over a small tray of skewers and a steaming bowl of something that looked like soup but smelled like spiced tea. Ilara took a cautious sip and smiled faintly. "This is good. See, Tolan's got good taste," Tolan said, smirking. As they continued through the market, Ilara seemed to relax, staying closer to Max and occasionally commenting on something that caught her eye. She asked about strange-looking tools, unusual fabrics, and a stall that sold what appeared to be living plants contained in floating bubbles. "They're not really alive," Tolan explained, poking one of the bubbles with a finger. "It's just a trick of the resin they use. Still, looks cool." Ilara reached out to touch one and laughed softly when it wobbled under her hand. "It does." Max watched her, feeling a sense of relief at seeing her smile again. He leaned toward Tolan. "She's starting to settle in, I think." "Good." "She needs to," Tolan replied. "Can't have her looking over her shoulder all the time." As they turned a corner, they encountered a large, multicolored mural on the side of a cargo bay door. It depicted scenes of different species working together, trading goods and building structures. Ilara stopped and stared at it for a long moment. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "What is it?" "An old station tradition," Tolan explained. "Every few years, they commission a new mural to reflect the station's culture. This one's been here for decades." Ilara reached out as if to touch it, then pulled her hand back. "It's different from my world. We didn't have things like this." Max stepped up beside her. "What did you have?" She hesitated, her voice quieter. "Natural patterns. The way light filtered through the canopy, the way the rivers flowed. It wasn't something made. It was just there." Tolan shrugged. "Sounds nice. Simple. But sometimes a little bit of art like this helps people connect." Ilara tilted her head, studying the mural again. "Maybe it does." Max glanced at her, then at Tolan. "We should keep moving. We've still got a few places to check out before we head back." Tolan nodded. "Sure. But next time, we're not doing all the touristy spots. Let's hit the industrial levels or one of the cargo bays." Show her something different. Maybe, Max agreed. Let's see how today goes. As they walked on, Ilara stayed close to Max, occasionally brushing his arm with hers. He didn't pull away, sensing she found comfort in the contact. Tolan, for his part, kept up a steady stream of commentary, critiquing vendors, offering trivia about the station's history, and cracking jokes that occasionally drew a soft laugh from Ilara. By the time they returned to Harvin's shop, the marketplace had begun to quiet, its lights dimming as the station's artificial night cycle approached. Ilara looked tired but content, her earlier anxiety noticeably diminished. "Thanks for coming along," Max said to Tolan as they entered the shop. "Having you around made it a lot easier." "Yeah, well, someone's got to keep you on your toes," Tolan replied, grinning. "Besides, she's not so bad. I'll help out again if you need me." Max nodded, then turned to Ilara. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you." Max smiled. "You're welcome. Get some rest. We'll figure out our next steps tomorrow." As Ilara retreated to her room, Max and Tolan lingered in the front of the shop, sharing a brief moment of quiet before heading their separate ways. Chapter 5. A Quiet Connection. A faint hum filled the small room as Max adjusted the settings on the new translation unit. The device hovered in the air between him and Ilara, its soft blue glow matching the color of the desk lamp. Seated across from him, Ilara leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly together as if she were holding her words in her palms. "Okay, let's give this a try," Max said, finally locking the settings in place. "Say something, Ilara." She hesitated, glancing between him and the small device. "Something." A moment passed before the translator chimed in with a smooth, mechanical voice. "Something." Max grinned. "Looks like it's working. Now we can have a proper conversation." Ilara smiled faintly, but her shoulders remained tense. "It still feels strange, speaking through a machine." "It's temporary," Max said, his tone soft. "You'll pick up the language soon. I'm already seeing how fast you learn." Tolan, who was leaning against the wall, chuckled. "Yeah, give it a week and she'll probably be correcting your grammar, Mac." Ilara glanced at Tolan, her smile growing a little more genuine. "What is grammar?" Max laughed. "That's a whole discussion for another time." Tolan pushed off the wall and moved toward the desk, scanning the translator's controls. "You know, you could have gone with the higher-end model. This one's fine, but the next version up has a more natural cadence." "This was all they had in the embassy tech room," Max replied, shrugging. "But if you've got connections for a better one, I'm all ears." Tolan smirked. "Let me see what I can do. In the meantime, this should work." Ilara observed them quietly, her hands relaxing as the conversation unfolded. "You two work together often?" she asked, the device rendering her words in a smooth, even tone. "Not exactly," Max said. "Tolan's more of an independent contractor." "Freelancer," Tolan corrected, grinning. "I just happen to end up helping out Max more than I'd like to admit." Ilara tilted her head. "And you are friends?" Max glanced at Tolan. "We've been through a few situations together. I'd say we're friends." "Good friends," Tolan added. "I mean, he owes me a few drinks, but I won't hold that against him." Ilara's smile widened just a fraction. "That sounds nice." Max studied her, noting how her posture had softened as the conversation turned lighter. "Ilara, are there any questions you've been wanting to ask? About the station, about us, anything?" She hesitated, then asked, "How did you come here?" "To this station?" Max leaned back in his chair. "Well, I'm with the embassy." I got assigned here a couple of years ago to help with diplomatic relations. It's not always exciting, but it has its moments. Toland sat down in the chair next to Max. As for me, I came here looking for trade opportunities. Spices, rare tech, the usual. I never intended to stay this long, but it kind of grew on me. Ilara nodded slowly. Your people, they explore so far. My people never travel far from home. Max folded his arms, his tone thoughtful. Humans have always been explorers. Some say it's just curiosity. Others think it's a survival instinct, finding new places in case something happens to the old ones. Toland leaned forward, resting his arms on the desk. I think it's because we can't sit still, always chasing the next thing, the next idea, the next big trade deal. Ilara's expression shifted, her brows knitting together. Do you ever feel lost? Traveling so much? Max considered her question carefully. Sometimes. It's easy to feel like you don't belong anywhere when you're constantly moving. But meeting people, learning about different cultures, that helps. It reminds you that you're never really alone. Toland nodded. He's got a point. Even if the station's far from home, the people here make it feel like one. Sometimes you just need the right folks around you. Ilara's gaze softened, and she nodded. I think I understand. A comfortable silence settled over the room. The faint hum of the translation device was the only sound for a moment. Max glanced at Toland, who gave a small shrug, as if to say, "She's doing fine." Max turned back to Ilara, his voice gentle. "We'll help you find your place here." "You already have," she said quietly. "Thank you." Toland leaned back in his chair. "Well, if you're going to start fitting in, you'll need to know where to get the best tea on this station. Max, want to take her to that little spot on level 7 tomorrow?" Max smiled. "Sure." "Ilara, do you like tea?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never had it." Toland grinned. "Then you're in for a treat. They've got dozens of blends from across the galaxy. Trust me, you'll find one you like." Max nodded. "It's a good idea. We can start exploring the station more. Get you used to it." Ilara looked between them, her smile returning. "I would like that. Thank you." As they made plans for the next day, the mood in the room shifted. The tension that had shadowed their earlier conversations lifted, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. Max and Toland shared a quick glance, both silently acknowledging that they were making progress. Ilara, though still reserved, now had a spark of curiosity in her eyes. She was beginning to adjust, one step at a time, and neither of them intended to let her face it alone. Chapter 6. Shared Moments. The festival was a vibrant display of lights and sound, transforming the station's main promenade into a glowing tapestry of cultural celebration. Holographic banners floated above the crowd, shifting colors to match the music that pulsed through the air. Vendors had set up stalls selling everything from alien confections to handcrafted jewelry, and the station's normally stark corridors were awash with warm, shifting hues. Max adjusted the collar of his jacket, glancing at Ilara as they walked side by side. She was looking around in wide-eyed wonder, her lavender skin reflecting the kaleidoscope of colors. Toland trailed a few steps behind, his hands tucked into the pockets of his vest as he casually surveyed the scene. "What do you think?" Max asked, leaning toward Ilara to be heard over the cheerful hum of the crowd. "It's beautiful," she replied, her voice carrying a quiet awe. "I didn't know humans had such celebrations." Toland chuckled. "This isn't just humans. Half the station's involved in this festival. You've got humans, Jorans, Zeltrans, even a few of those Centauri drummers up there. He pointed toward a raised platform where a group of tall, silver-skinned beings was creating rhythmic patterns that seemed to ripple through the very air. The crowd around them clapped in time, their faces lit by the soft, shifting light. Ilara watched, captivated. My people never celebrated like this. Our gatherings were quiet. We shared stories, songs, but nothing like this. Max smiled at her. Well, it's about sharing too. Just louder, and with more lights. They wandered further into the promenade, stopping occasionally at the various stalls. Tolan chatted easily with the vendors, haggling over a small figurine carved from an iridescent stone. Ilara lingered at a stall selling delicate strings of beads that glowed faintly when touched. "These are beautiful," she said, running her fingers lightly over a strand. The vendor, a squat, green-skinned merchant with a wide smile, leaned forward. "They're memory beads. Each one records the warmth of your touch. They're said to carry a little piece of you wherever they go." Max raised an eyebrow. "That sounds poetic." Ilara looked up at him, her expression curious. "Could we take some with us?" "I don't see why not," Max replied. "How much for the strand?" After a short negotiation, Max handed over a few credits, and Ilara looped the beads carefully around her wrist. She held her arm up, watching the faint glow shift as the beads responded to her movements. Her smile was small but genuine. "You're pretty good at this whole gift-giving thing," Tolan commented, smirking. "I'm taking notes." "You'd better," Max said, grinning. "She deserves a chance to enjoy herself." Ilara glanced at him. "Thank you. Both of you." Tolan shrugged. "Just doing my part. Now, let's grab something to eat before Max blows all his credits on glowing trinkets." They found a small stall offering skewers of roasted vegetables and seasoned meats. Ilara hesitated, studying the options, and Max stepped in to help. "Try this one," he said, pointing to a skewer with golden vegetables. "It's mild but really flavorful." She took a tentative bite and nodded. "This is very good." "I told you," Max said, smiling. Tolan grabbed a skewer for himself. "All right, Max, since you're the expert, what's next?" "Well, there's supposed to be a light show at the Central Plaza," Max replied. "We could head there." As they made their way to the plaza, the crowd grew denser, but Ilara stayed close to Max, her hand brushing his arm as they walked. He glanced at her, noting how her earlier tension had faded. She seemed calmer, more at ease, even as the lights and sounds swirled around them. When they reached the plaza, the light show was already beginning. Holographic patterns danced in the air, shifting and morphing into images of distant planets, starships, and abstract shapes. The crowd fell into a hushed awe, the colors reflecting in their faces. Ilara looked up, her lavender eyes shimmering in the shifting light. "It's like a dream," she said softly. Max watched her, the corners of his mouth turning up. "I'm glad you like it." Tolan leaned against a nearby railing, arms crossed, his expression relaxed. "This is a lot more impressive than the last festival I went to. That one just had a couple of holographic balloons and a bad band." Ilara chuckled, a sound Max hadn't heard from her before. It was light and musical, and it made him smile wider. "Do you like this more than your people's quiet gatherings?" Max asked her. "I don't know," she replied, still gazing up at the lights. "It's different. But different isn't bad." They stood together, watching as the show unfolded. As the images shifted from abstract patterns to scenes of interspecies cooperation, Max felt a faint brush of Ilara's hand against his. He looked down to find her fingers resting lightly against his own. He didn't move away. Instead, he let his hand relax and return the gentle contact. Tolan noticed and smirked, but said nothing. He turned his attention back to the light show, leaving them to their quiet moment. The light show culminated in a burst of radiant patterns that lit up the entire plaza. The crowd erupted into applause, and Max looked at Ilara. She was smiling, not just a faint smile, but a genuine, warm expression that lit up her face. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said, her voice soft yet certain. "I'm glad you came," Max replied, meeting her gaze. "It wouldn't have been the same without you." The crowd began to disperse, and Toland stretched. "Well, I'm calling it a night. You two enjoy yourselves. Try not to get lost on the way back." Max shook his head, amused. "We'll be fine." As Toland walked off, Ilara shifted closer to Max. "Can we stay a little longer?" "Of course," Max said. "Take as much time as you need." They lingered in the plaza, talking quietly as the holograms faded and the promenade slowly returned to its normal, bustling self. For the first time since they'd met, Max felt that Ilara wasn't just adjusting. She was beginning to enjoy her place here. Chapter 7. Adjustments. The morning after the festival, the station felt quieter, its usual bustling energy dampened by the artificial night cycle still lingering over the promenade. Max met Toland in a small café just outside the embassy quarter. The air smelled of brewed Treisan beans and toasted pastries, and the space was filled with a soft murmur of early risers exchanging hushed conversation. Toland stirred a steaming cup of tea, leaning back in his chair. "So, how's Ilara doing today?" Max rubbed the back of his neck. "Hard to say. She was quiet this morning, but I think she's just tired. Yesterday was a lot." "She seemed pretty into the whole festival thing," Toland said, smirking. "I saw the way she was looking around, like a kid in a candy shop. Bet it felt good to show her something fun after everything she's been through." Max nodded. "It did. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough." "Enough?" Toland raised an eyebrow. "You took her in, made sure she's safe, even got her to smile a bit. What more do you want?" Max sighed. "It's not about what I want. I just don't know if I'm helping her the way she really needs." Toland leaned forward, his expression thoughtful for once. "Look, you can't fix everything, Max. You're not some miracle worker. You're just one guy doing his best. And, from what I've seen, you're doing a hell of a lot more than most would." "Thanks," Max said, though his tone was still laced with uncertainty. "I guess I just need to keep listening, see what she needs as she settles in." "You're overthinking it," Toland said, sipping his tea. "Just keep being yourself. She'll let you know if she needs more." Max considered that for a moment before nodding. "You're right. Thanks, Toland." "Hey, that's what I'm here for," Toland said with a grin. "Now, finish your tea and let's get back to it. I've got a shipment to pick up later, but I can swing by and see how she's doing if you need a break." "That would help," Max said. "She likes having people around, and it's good for her to get different perspectives." As the day unfolded, Max returned to his quarters to find Ilara seated at the small table, her hands resting on her lap. She looked up as he entered, offering a small smile. "Max," she said softly, "you're back." "Yeah," he replied, setting down a small bag he had picked up at the market. "I thought you might like this." He reached into the bag and pulled out a bundle of thin, brightly colored scarves. "I saw these and thought of you. They're supposed to be traditional Joran wraps. I figured you might like wearing something from another culture." Ilara accepted the scarves, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns. "They're beautiful." "Thank you." "You're welcome," Max said, sitting across from her. "How are you feeling today?" She hesitated. "It's different. After the festival, everything feels quieter." "That's not a bad thing," Max said. "It gives you time to think." Ilara nodded slowly. "I thought a lot last night. About my home, about this place, about the two of you." Max tilted his head. "What about us?" "You and Tolan," she said. "You're very different, but you both try so hard to make things better. I don't understand why." Max leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Because you deserve it. Everyone does. Just because you're far from home doesn't mean you should feel alone." Ilara's gaze softened. "But you hardly know me." Max smiled. "Sometimes it doesn't take long to know what someone needs. And right now, you need stability, kindness, and a chance to find your place here." She looked down at the scarves in her hands, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "It's still strange. To feel welcome." "Well, get used to it," Max said lightly. "Because you are." A knock at the door drew their attention. Tolan's voice came through the intercom. "Hey, you two in there? I brought snacks." Max opened the door to find Tolan holding a small tray of pastries and a thermos of what he claimed was the best spiced tea on the station. "Thought you could use a pick-me-up," he said, walking in without waiting for an invitation. "Make yourself at home," Max said dryly. "I always do," Tolan quipped, setting the tray on the table. "Ilara, you have to try these. Best pastries you'll ever have." Ilara reached for one hesitantly, taking a small bite. Her eyes widened as she chewed. "This is incredible." "Right." Tolan grinned. "You're welcome." They spent the next hour talking, eating, and sharing stories. Tolan regaled them with tales of his trading adventures, some clearly embellished, while Max occasionally added his own, more subdued anecdotes from his diplomatic missions. Ilara listened intently, occasionally laughing at Tolan's more outrageous claims. As the conversation waned, Tolan stood and stretched. "Well, I'd better get going. Shipment won't pick itself up." "Thanks for stopping by," Max said, standing to walk Tolan out. "No problem," Tolan said, clapping Max on the shoulder. "Keep doing what you're doing. She's starting to come out of her shell." Max nodded. "I'll see you later." After Tolan left, Max turned back to find Ilara holding one of the scarves against her neck, her expression thoughtful. "Does it suit me?" she asked, looking up at him. Max smiled. "It looks perfect on you." Her blush deepened, and she looked away, a faint smile on her lips. Max watched her for a moment, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. She was slowly finding her place, and that was enough for now. Chapter 8. Moving Forward. The central chamber of the diplomatic wing hummed with quiet conversation as representatives from a dozen different species took their places at the long, curved conference table. Max stood near the edge of the room, adjusting the data pad in his hands. Tolan leaned casually against a nearby column, watching the room with a practiced air of disinterest. "Remind me again why we're here," Tolan said under his breath. "I'm not exactly the embassy type." "You're here because I trust you," Max replied, keeping his eyes on the room as he spoke. "And because you've seen more of the station's underworld than anyone else I know. Your insight might be helpful." Tolan smirked. "Nice way of saying I know all the shady spots." Max's lips twitched into a brief smile. "Something like that." Before Tolan could reply, the low murmur in the room quieted as the lead ambassador, a tall figure with shimmering emerald scales, called the meeting to order. Max stepped forward to present his report, his voice steady as he outlined recent developments in interspecies relations on the station. Ilara sat quietly in a chair near the corner, her hands clasped in her lap. She was dressed in a flowing tunic of soft blue fabric that matched her skin's lavender hue, and the faint glow of her memory beads caught the room's gentle lighting. As Max spoke, Ilara's gaze stayed fixed on him. She listened intently, her expression calm yet focused. Max's words were measured, his tone professional, but Tolan caught the slight shifts in his body language, the way his shoulders eased whenever he glanced in Ilara's direction, the faint softening of his tone when he referenced her contributions to the ongoing cultural exchange efforts. When Max concluded his report, the ambassador nodded approvingly. "Your efforts have not gone unnoticed, Mr. Richardson. The station's atmosphere is undoubtedly more welcoming thanks to your team's work." "Thank you, Ambassador," Max replied with a respectful bow of his head. As the formal discussion continued, Max stepped back to join Tolan and Ilara. Tolan gave him a quick pat on the back. "Nice speech. Sounded official enough to bore everyone, but not enough to put them to sleep." "Thanks, I think," Max said dryly. Ilara smiled slightly. "You spoke very well." Max's expression softened. "Glad you think so. I was worried I'd trip over my words." "You didn't," she said simply, her voice steady. Tolan nudged him. "So, what happens now?" "We wait for the ambassador's decision," Max replied. "If they approve the proposal, we'll have a framework for more structured cultural exchanges. It would mean more opportunities for people like Ilara to find their place here." Tolan shrugged. "Sounds good. You think they'll go for it?" Max hesitated, then nodded. "I think so. The mood's been shifting. There's more interest in cooperation now than there was a few months ago." As the meeting drew to a close, the ambassador rose and addressed the room. "I believe we have reached a consensus. The cultural exchange proposal will be officially endorsed, and we will begin implementing the pilot program within the next cycle." A wave of quiet approval swept through the room. Max exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Well done," Tolan said. "Looks like you pulled it off." Max turned to Ilara, who had risen from her seat. "This could mean more opportunities for you to share your culture, Ilara. How do you feel about that?" She tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "I think it's a good step. There's still much I need to learn, but if I can help others understand my people, it would mean a great deal." Max nodded. "You've already done more than you realize. Just by being here, you've shown everyone that cooperation is possible." Tolan stretched. "All right, we've done the official thing. What's next?" "Celebration." Max shook his head, amused. "It's not really my style. Maybe just a quiet dinner." Ilara looked at him. "I would like that. A quiet dinner. Sounds nice." Tolan grinned. "I'll leave you two to it, then. Don't get too boring without me." As Tolan strolled out of the chamber, Max turned to Ilara. "Shall we?" She nodded, her memory beads catching the light as they walked toward the exit. The station's corridors were calmer now, the earlier bustle having quieted as the artificial night cycle approached. They walked in comfortable silence, their footsteps echoing softly against the metal floor. When they reached a small cafe tucked into a quiet corner of the promenade, Max held the door open for her. "After you." Ilara stepped inside, her gaze wandering over the simple but welcoming interior. A few patrons sat at small tables, speaking in hushed tones. Max led her to a table near the window, where they could watch the station's slow-turning vista through the large, transparent wall. As they sat, Ilara leaned slightly forward, her lavender hands resting on the smooth tabletop. "Thank you, Mac." "For what?" he asked, looking genuinely curious. "For helping me find my place here," she said. "For listening. For making me feel like I belong." He smiled. "You do belong, Ilara. You've brought something important to the station. To me, even. I'm just glad I could help." They fell into an easy rhythm of conversation, sharing their thoughts on the day's events and their hopes for what might come next. The station's lights dimmed slightly, marking the beginning of its night cycle, but inside the café, the warm glow remained steady. For the first time in a long while, Max felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, not just with the day's outcome, but with the connection he and Ilara had built. As the hours passed, the conversation grew more personal, more open. They spoke about the things that brought them comfort, the memories that shaped them, and the possibilities that lay ahead. And though the night eventually deepened, neither felt the need to leave. Together they sat, content to simply be in each other's company.